No, close the door. Close the door. Good afternoon. On behalf of the Association for Corporate Growth Los Angeles, welcome to our first Digital CEO Roundtable. We thank you very much for joining us. This afternoon, we're joined by four terrific Southern California CEOs. Therese Tucker, CEO of Blackline. Roger O'Brien, President and CEO, Santa Monica Seafood. Tim Gardner, CEO of Riffin. And Brian Williams, CEO of Shimtech Group. Now, I see that Therese has just exited our room, but I trust that she will be back shortly. For now, I'm going to hand it off to our moderator, Stephen Lee, partner at Goodwin Procter and currently the president of the ACG Los Angeles. Steve, why don't you take it away?
Great, Michael. I appreciate it. And thanks to all of you for joining. This is going to be a very interesting and informational discussion today. As Michael mentioned, we have four great founders and CEOs of companies in California that really hit an interesting industry cross-section for us. We've got two companies that have essential business employees, one in the food distribution space, one in the aerospace and defense manufacturing sector. We've got a leading cloud software company and a venture-backed company operating around the biotech and pharma space. So why don't we start today by doing some quick introductions, and I'm going to ask our distinguished panelists to give a quick background on themselves and the company. So first, we have Therese Tucker from Blackline, which again is a leading provider of software that automates and controls the entire financial close process.
Nice.
Therese, can you start us off?
Yes, I am the CEO and the founder of Blackline. I founded the company in 2001, and I have a background in technology. I'm a programmer at heart. Okay. Blackline last year, actually I'll start back. We were bootstrapped up until 2013, and we did an IPO in 2016, and we're approaching our 4-year anniversary as a publicly traded company. About 1,200 employees based in Woodland Hills.
That's great, thanks. And then next we have Tim Gardner from Riffin, which is a tech company helping to make biotech and pharma companies faster and more efficient in terms of product development. Tim, do you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, Tim Gardner, founder, CEO of Riffin. We're a small business, 50 people, based in San Francisco area, actually Oakland, but we have been in business for 6 years, and we provide computer-aided design and data analytics software for pharmaceutical development and biotech product development.
Great. And next we have Brian Williams from Shimtech Industries, which is a top manufacturing group in the aerospace and defense industry. Brian, you mind saying a few words?
Yeah, you bet. So I grew up in the San Francisco area, so go Tim, and moved down to LA in the 90s. I spent about 20 years working for Hughes Aircraft and Boeing in a fairly big company corporate environment. But since the early to mid 2000s, I've been working for equity firms, doing sometimes turnarounds, sometimes growth plays, where I'm, again, working with aerospace companies, usually small companies or groups of companies, to kind of align the strategy and help them grow. And currently I'm working with a group just like that has a couple of companies in Europe, some in California, one in Mexico, that is involved in piece parts for airplanes. Fasteners, shims, brackets, clips, lots of small detailed machined parts that are small, high volume, but obviously mission critical for the airplane.
Great, and thanks very much. And last but certainly not least, we've got Roger O'Brien from Santa Monica Seafoods, which is the largest seafood distributor in the Southwest United States. Roger, you mind saying a few words?
Sure, thank you, Michael, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm the president and CEO of Santa Monica Seafood. We are an 80-year-old company. We are both a processor and a distributor of fresh and frozen seafood. We focus on both the Southwestern and the Midwestern sections of the United States. We have approximately 700 employees working in 6 different states, but our headquarters is located here in Southern California. I've been with the company 15 years, and during that time, we grew from 60 million in revenues to $500 million in revenue. That was pre-COVID-19. Also, we were the proud recipient last year in 2019 of the Strategic Growth Award that our sponsor today, the Association for Corporate Growth, presented to us. Michael?
Great, thanks so much. And so maybe we'll jump into the very first question, which is, would you guys mind each telling us briefly about how COVID-19 has impacted your business and how you've responded? Talk about perhaps the biggest operational challenges you faced. And so I'll start this by directing the question to Brian and Roger. And in particular, I was just curious to see how, because you have essential business personnel, how have you managed to, navigate the working environment for those employees? Maybe we can start with you, Brian.
Okay, sure. So we do, since some of our parts are for military aircraft, and we have government priority ratings and some secret work, we get classified as an essential business. But what's interesting is even our 2 European companies have remained open. The only one that's closed is the one in Mexico, where the U.S. essential business speech didn't fly really well. What's been interesting for us is it's been very fast-paced, lots of long hours. I was caught off guard by the suddenness of the customer closures, Boeing, Airbus mostly, and we had to respond very quickly. Frankly, I didn't feel much like a business partner with those OEMs. I learned about most of those closures from the press before I heard about it from them. So April's been kind of tough. I think May and June are looking quite a bit better. We've had a laser focus on cash. And I think our biggest current challenge has been, since we're an essential business, keeping the employees safe, number one, while reducing costs and monitoring cash, working the bottom line, and then also looking for new revenue opportunities for the top line. In my case, that's more military aircraft work, it's underserved commercial customers, and finding the right balance. I think it's just juggling all those balls, Stephen, would be, I think, our biggest challenge between employees, cash management, and trying to pivot the business to more attractive markets than aerospace will probably, at least commercial aerospace, will be for the next couple of years.
Got it. Yeah, thank you. And what about you, Roger?
Well, let me set the stage first. We started the year in my opinion, excellent financial shape. Our cash, our available borrowings under our line of credit were excellent, very high for our company size. We had excellent positive working capital. Our working capital ratios, all of our ratios, our debt to equity ratios were all very strong. This was meant to be a year where we were going to go out and do a lot of big M&A deals. So we were in good shape there. The second point I would make would be, at the end of February, early March, watching what was going on in Wuhan, China, we developed what I called the D plan, a disaster plan. We did this at Santa Monica back in 2008 during the Great Recession. Never implemented it back then, but we did it again here, so we were ready. So when the cliff happened, because remember, the national emergency was declared on the 13th, restaurants were closed on the 15th, we implemented our D plan right away. By the end of March, we had laid off first all of our temporary workers, not many. We had a layoff of our workforce. Again, it was rather small, less than 10%. All of our salaried people took a pay cut. All of our bonus programs were canceled. Yeah. All of our business travel was stopped. Our overtime was reduced down to zero, and we instituted a hiring freeze. We had all of our departments prepare a formal backup plan in case they lost, a lot or possibly all of their staff in their areas. We started cutting back on purchase orders, canceled some orders, if you will. All of our CapEx was put on hold. We had a big expansion going on, $3.5 million expansion going on in Chicago that we stopped. We had a crossdock in Northern California that we had just signed the lease on that we didn't pursue further. We had another building that we were ready to lease that was 50,000 square feet locally. We stopped that effort, canceled our golf tournament, canceled all of our marketing events, and then we focused what I'll call a three-pronged approach. First was to go after all the business that we had, primarily on the retail grocery side, because that was going strong. Second was to cut back expenses everywhere. We talked to every major service group that was a big monthly cost, be it landlords, bankers, insurance companies, trucking companies, utility companies, and that was very successful. We got just about everybody to agree to a partial payment deferment plan. I didn't want to defer 100%. We insisted on paying 50% of our bills to them and deferring the rest for a couple of months. I didn't want to create crisis number 2 a few months down the road, if you will. Mm-hmm. And then we also focused on new revenue sources. We really were very successful there. And that's one of the silver linings that came out of this for us. We have 2 retail stores, Santa Monica, Costa Mesa. They have both a seafood market and a cafe. The cafes were closed down. They had, but we kept going with a curbside pickup business and home delivery business out of our 2 retail stores. 3 weeks ago, our 2 retail stores, the revenue was off 35%. Last week, year over year, last week, our revenue for those 2 retail stores was up 26% over the prior year. So that was very successful for us. We started selling to other seafood distributors. Last year, we sold 0 to other seafood distributors. So far this year to date, we've sold over $8 million there. We opened up a home delivery service out of our main facility. We just opened that up a week and a half ago. Overnight delivery, FedEx, national platform. It's off to a great start. We went out with version 1. We need to upgrade the program and get to version 2, 3, and 4 pretty soon. We're also opening up we have a lot of freezer space in a lot of different buildings. So we've consolidated that to make sure we had no outside storage. And then offering our freezer space as cold storage, which is very short right now for everyone, to a lot of our suppliers for them to use at a fee. So doing all that, managing the balance sheet, cash, inventory, receivables, and payables, that's been it. A lot of cash flow monitoring, a lot of new analytical reports that we never had before. I try to put out an email to all of our employees twice a week, changing the topics, company updates, some funny stories, a little motivation, some thanks for the loyalty. It's been nonstop. We've been working with our national trade association. It's called NFI, National Fisheries. They've been extremely helpful. And right now we're starting on our rebuild efforts. We set up a task force, and their focus is to rebuild Santa Monica for what we've lost. We're in better shape than most. And to put it into perspective, I can take all of our divisions and operations and classify them as either food service or retail. Food service is 60% of our business. Retail is 40%. Obviously, our food service took a big hit. Our retail stepped up in volume. And I hate to look at a particular day, week, month, but if I look at it year to date, we're only down 8%. Now, we've had some bad days and some bad weeks in the last 5, 6, 7 weeks, but every single week has shown an improvement at the top line. So we're happy where we are. I love meeting this challenge, and everybody has stepped up well.
That's great. Thanks, Roger. And Therese and Tim, maybe we'll start with Tim, but let's hear about what happens on the other side of the world in terms of tech-based companies. So Tim, I know that you had a very thoughtful plan as well when this first started, when this first hit. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that? Oh, Tim, you've got to take yourself off of mute.
Our reactions to this started in late February. It really was triggered by the parking of I think it was the Diamond Princess at Oakland, which caused a lot of employees to get really nervous. And so the first thing we had to do was put employees at ease. And so within a day or two, we gave everybody, this was like the first week of March, a voluntary, we just shifted to a voluntary work from home policy. That's relatively easy for us because we were already highly virtualized and very light footprint operating physical footprint. And then each day we met and we just kept ratcheting up. Within 5 days, we just decided to close shop. On March 13th, we closed shop completely and everybody started working from home. For us, that was a pretty easy transition. About 2/3 of our company is software engineers. And I'll be honest, they said, why couldn't we have done this in the first place? Why did we ever have to come into the office? So I'd say their productivity actually bumped up a little bit at first. But we've also seen some decline. And some other things we did to put people at ease, we suspended our PTO policy. If people had to take time off for anything COVID related, no questions asked, just take the time off, report it, but you don't have to lose vacation time or sick time or anything. So take the pain away from them for dealing with the issues. Take whatever stress we could take away from employees, and then increase communication. But the other impacts after sort of getting people's safety and comfort and psychology in place, we really had to figure out what to do as a business. We are not a week-to-week cash business. We're venture funded, so our timelines and operating plans are really stretching over trajectories that go 12 to 18 months in terms of how we manage cash. And so our board got very nervous and they said, we've seen stuff like this before. Whatever you think it is, it's probably twice as bad as you think it is. So plan for the worst. And we went from an expected 40% headcount increase this year to a slight layoff and suspending virtually all hiring to preserve cash and extend our runway immediately by about 40%, 30-40% in terms of our cash on hand. And then we have pursued a financing to add additional cushion. And that's not because we're operating our business under the expectation that our sales will be a worst case scenario, but we're planning for the worst, and then we're trying to meet our goals nonetheless. And if that happens, we'll just be in a better place to react. So far, our first quarter was one of our best ever, but I think our expectation is that we will see more of the impacts in Q2, Q3, because as Roger was pointing out, there's a lot of companies that pull back on spending, and they're going to make decisions slower, and they're going to be more conservative, and that's where so we're still expecting some reduced sales. And the way we have dealt with that, it was briefly shown, was this timeline. But I guess I'll come back to that. That was flashed on screen. I'll come back to how we're assessing that.
Yeah, we'll definitely get back to that one because that'll be interesting to hear. Therese, what about you?
Well, the beautiful thing about a software as a service company is that you have a high degree of recurring revenue and a high degree of predictability, which gives us a lot of sort of comfort in, very difficult times. So that allowed us, and we have a very strong balance sheet. We did a convert last summer for $500 million, and it's there. So we feel good about, the company, the customers. We enable companies to actually close their books remotely. So this is not a bad thing if they need Blackline, right? So we were very quickly able to turn to what we call our two core values. We say in the company, there's two things that will never, ever change on. One, we serve our customers, and two, we serve each other. And with number one, we immediately started coming out with customer relief programs. We're working with some of the impacted industries where we have customers to sort of, if there's things that we need to do to help them. We put out our entire training library so that CPAs could get CPE credits for free. We started allowing customers to use additional products to help them with the close. We started doing a number of different training sessions for companies that were not used to doing accounting remotely. So we've done a lot in those, and it's been very, very well received by our customers. And that's, I mean, it's just been a wonderful opportunity to build those customer relationships for us. Now, with our employees, I think a couple of you have said as well that it was important to reassure our employees. We found that communicating a lot is the best possible thing. We put together an executive task force. We meet every morning for 30 minutes to go over anything that might be discussed as a management team. All right. We have twice weekly management meetings. We had an employee survey go out today to find out what people are concerned about in terms of going back to work. We have had happy hours. This last Friday, we did something called WTF, where we said, all right, everybody, you're not balancing your work life very well. So we're going to have WTF, walk this Friday. All right, everybody shut your computer at 2:00 and get outside and Instagram the picture of you walking. Okay. So a number of things around taking care of the employees. Again, like Tim, we already had, work from home Fridays. We've done that quite a bit in the past. So that was pretty seamless. So we're very fortunate from that regard.
Great, thanks very much. Well, we're by no means past the situation, but it does seem like a lot of companies have faced a lot of the biggest challenges, or at least the biggest unknowns, and responded. And hopefully you guys have all had a chance to catch your breath a little bit. But I would love to hear some of your insights into what you guys think are some of the opportunities right now, and what the biggest issues you're seeing in terms of, how are people managing cash? How are people spending cash? What do you guys think in terms of capital investment or capital raises? And then what's your outlook on the M&A markets generally? And maybe we can start with you, Therese.
We are seeing out in the markets that, given the uncertainty, people are sort of squirreling away their budgets, right? They may or may not yet be cutting spending, but they're definitely taking a good look at what they're prioritizing. All right. So, and they're prioritizing the things that they view as more value add over the short term. Now, in terms of the M&A market, a couple of the people that I've spoken with said that it generally takes 4 to 6 months after the crisis begins before M&A really starts to become something that is timely at that point. Because, I think somebody else said on here, it's going to take twice as long as you think, right? And it's not until that realization sets in that most people are really going to be interested in something that maybe they wouldn't have before. In terms of spending and cash, Blackline was bootstrapped. And so we are typically always very cognizant of what we're spending. I don't know that we've changed a whole lot. And I think that's just because of the nature of our business.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And what about you, Tim? What are you seeing in terms of all those issues?
I think for us, we have a little bit of a strange business that we sell to, our core customers develop products over 10-year cycles, and their technology investment decisions are made over 1, 2, 3 years. So they play the long game to begin with. And the first deal we've done after March, our customer decided not to renew for a 1-year subscription, but for a 3-year subscription. So I don't see the decisions being bounced around by COVID, because they're making 3, 5+ year decisions. But what I do see is we've seen initially an actual uptick in engagement, because people couldn't be as distracted with the normal business. And so they started focusing on those things that were longer term investments. We saw 4 requests for proposals come in, all due May 4th. And I think that was because of sort of an acceleration of people doing those planning and investment exercises. But I'm also worried that their decision to pull the trigger will be slower because it's easy to collect information. You've got the people to do it. It's harder to pull the trigger when there's uncertainty. And so that's the key thing that we sort of dealing with uncertainty is the hardest part for everyone. And the approach we've taken, which I see reflected in everyone else's comments here, is sort of dial the needle to the extreme of uncertainty. It's going to be a bear market for a while. Just assume that. Assume there will be no live marketing events for 9 to 12 months. So just push all of your marketing online and take as much uncertainty away as you can. And what that's done for us is by just sort of drawing the line and saying it's going to be like this, is it's actually created an opportunity for innovation. So the team has tried things they've never tried before, and some of them have been really, really successful. We decided to put all of our normal live training, like in-person trainings, online, and we had 125 people sign up for the first 40 seats. And so what was going to be a one-time event has turned into a monthly thing. So I think that leads, create certainty almost arbitrarily. Do your calculations, make your risk estimates, and then draw the line. And for your team, when you create that uncertainty, that certainty, it allows them to act. And you might get it wrong, but that's okay, because people just accept that you might have to revise your estimations, and they'll accept that as long as you're methodical and communicate the why. And so that's been largely how we've approached them.
That's great. Thanks, Tim. And what about you, Brian?
Regarding cash, before COVID, you can guess with aerospace, we have a lot of metal, a lot of raw material, a lot of inventory, sometimes what's called pre-preg or composite raw material also that can be quite expensive. And, before COVID, we did a pretty good job of working capital management 101, inventory, AR, AP, and so forth. But now with the COVID, it's become much more critical that we sync up with our customers, that we don't overbuild, and that we respond quickly enough, kind of what Therese was saying, to the really rapidly changing market conditions. We're doing a lot of scenario modeling, like I think, Tim, you were saying, for liquidity testing. And I'm doing much more micromanagement. So some of the actions you can probably guess. We've reduced OT. We've let temporary employees go. We've had some layoffs and some furloughs. We've had some salaried pay cuts. I'm doing a lot of special approvals for expenses. We've deferred new investments in CapEx and so forth. But now what we're really trying to do is restructure the businesses for the next 3 years or so of lower revenue. And in aerospace, you just have to maybe ask yourself this question: what would it take for you to get on an airplane again, right? And there are some wild cards here with regards to how long will it take to have a vaccine? What will we do in the meantime? I know Germany is looking at having immunity passports, where to get on a plane, you might have to show an international flight. You might have to show proof of either negativity or immunity, right? So there are these kinds of uncertainties in the markets. And so we are restructuring our businesses based on some fairly drastic assumptions for the next 3 years of lower revenue. And then, just like Tim was saying, we're also running extreme downside scenarios. So we have a plan B in case we're being too optimistic still. So that's kind of our approach. And so then we're also having a parallel revenue focus to help cash, not just preserving it from a cost point of view. We'd like to play a little offense, not just defense. So we're defending against revenue declines, for example, and I'm proactively contacting lots of aerospace customers to let them know about our business continuity and the extraordinary actions that we're taking to be viable for them. But then we're also, when I say play offense, we're pivoting a lot of our resources to growth areas, because you can get a lot more cash out of growth than you can out of counting pennies, right? And so we're looking at expanded markets for underserved commercial customers, more military customers, and we're also expanding our product lines to go after more business that way. Then I'm reaching out to customers, obviously, regarding late stage opportunities. With aerospace, most analysts don't expect aviation or aerospace to really recover for another 3 to 4 years. And first, leisure travel might recover. Single aisle airplanes like the 737 MAX or A320 mostly drive off of that. Then later, business travel is expected to recover, but that might not be for another 4 years or 5 years. And that drives the wide body business primarily, 787, for example. Business deals will still be driven, I think, by face-to-face relationships in the long term. And personally, I may be really wrong on this, but I don't think video conferencing only will last forever. And I think people will be back on planes. It'll just take a while for that to happen. That's kind of our view of life. That hopefully covered your questions.
Yeah, no, that's great. And Roger, you were talking a little bit about new revenue streams, and then that you were looking forward to M&A this year. Can you give us a little bit of what your thoughts are?
Well, I agree with Teresa that M&A is not going to be there right away. It's going to take a little while to get going. But in the seafood industry, we're a small industry. A lot of small companies, and there's already been a consolidation process going on throughout the industry, for the last 5 or 6 years. It will continue. I think it's going to continue a lot faster. Why? Because because there are small companies, and I think the smaller the company, the worse they were hit typically during this last couple months. And a lot of those guys just aren't going to want to step back into their business and try to rebuild it up. I read an article today that said after all disasters, not just virus, medical related disasters, but after a typical major disaster, 35% of all companies do not restart. We're dependent on restaurants. I've heard anywhere from 30 to 50, 60% of restaurants won't reopen ever again. And that's mainly your small, independent type group. If I wasn't depressed before, after listening to Brian's comments, I'm depressed now about the airline industry. I've read there's 3,000 planes that were offline worldwide. We have an operation in Las Vegas. It's the only one we had to fully close because the governor of Nevada insisted that Nevada shut down completely. But now Nevada's talking about opening back up, and I'm telling everybody, they can open it back up, but nobody's going to come.
Right.
Because Vegas is a tourist town, and without the tourists, there is no Vegas. There's no hotel occupancy. There's no restaurant occupancy. And to get the tourists there, the other states have to open up the ability for their people to go out again. They can't go out again without the airlines. And all the people going to Vegas come from other states and other countries. So listening to Brian's comments, I think it's going to take a long time for Vegas to come back.
I don't know. Did you see the beach in Newport?
I heard in California, you just can't keep people off beaches, can you? But on the M&A front, there's going to be some companies that won't reopen, and those who do survive are going to just say thank you. We're going to go after your customers, but everybody's also talking about the second wave that's going to happen before the end of the year, just on this virus. Well, there's going to be a second wave of something. If it's not a virus, it's a war, it's an economic issue. People are talking that it could be climate related, who knows what. But a lot of people are going to say, okay, I'm going to have to borrow money to get back into business, do all these things again to restart. And then there's going to be a second wave in November or whenever. No, thank you. If I can sell now and get something for my business, I'll be happy to do so. So I see a lot of that happening. I see companies like, there's two, Cheesecake Factory. They just took $200 million from, Roark Capital. There was U.S. Foods took $500 million from KKR. Obviously, they're taking cash to not just survive today, but to, in my opinion, gear up for the M&A opportunities that are going to be coming down the road really soon. I think that's a smart move. And that's why we're looking at our balance sheet still. And we're trying to hang on to what we can because we know on the one hand, we're going to have to help our customers, primarily restaurants, hotels, casinos, that type, from a vendor financing perspective, if you will, open back up. But we also want to have some money left over to do some deals because I know that we'll do deals. And I'm talking to other companies and other CEOs, and it just confirms what I know is going to happen.
You know, Brian, I've been to the Santa Monica Seafood in Santa Monica, and I mean, you should have a lot more of those.
2 of those are enough. We enjoy those. They're great branding, but it's not our core business. The shareholders have always wanted to open up more of those, but I've always said, no, we need more processing, more distribution plants instead.
Got it. You're on mute, Stephen.
Thank you very much. So you guys have started going towards my next question, which is, probably the question that everybody wants to know the answer to, which is, how do we get back to normal? And what do you think normal looks like in terms of, not just getting your people back into your offices, but your people to the rest of the world? And so maybe we can start with Tim here. And I know, Michael, you've got a graphic that Tim's shared with us that we might share now.
Yeah, well, Mike's putting that up. And Jody asked the question on the chat a long time ago, how much of your focus is on tactical short-term versus long-term? And I'd say at this point, at least for us, it's about 95+% strategic. We're past the reactive phase. Everybody, we were decisive. I think everyone here has indicated just how decisive they all were. There was no messing around. It was just like move the needle way to the extreme and get your business shored up. And now it's like, okay, how do we prepare ourselves for a downturn of unknown length so that when things do turn for the better, we can react. And potentially we have to react with a business that looks different from the one we thought it would be, because the world has changed. And so we need to have cash on hand to be able to react. We need to have a strong, well-trained employee base that's optimistic and all of those things, so that as the world changes, we can react with it. So the starting point for that, for me, was this graphic which sort of articulates one of the scenarios we thought about. If you assume the very, very best of cases for our recovery, what would have to happen to get there, and how long would that be? And so this is a graphic which you can see online too after the fact, of what is the very best situation we could imagine. And it's pretty long. It's basically not getting back to any sort of true normality like it was before until February, March of next year. And that's because if you look at the color-coded bars at the bottom, it's kind of hard to read on screen, but basically the purple phase is what would be starting at May 15th. That's the exit from lockdown and to partial return to work and easing of social distancing. We made this prediction back in March, and it does seem that things are kind of converging on May 15th as the time people start to ease up. We can only do that if we have strong surveillance, contact tracing, and identification based on testing of cases. Unfortunately, I don't see this country getting its act together on that the way it needs to. And it's very possible we'll see a bounce of increasing cases again, because we're moving towards relaxation of distancing without the protections of contact tracing and other measures. But if we do it right, then it's probably another 2 to 3 months before we get back to something approaching full employment. And that will depend on protective measures like PPE and drugs that help ameliorate the hospitalization of COVID patients, because that will allow us to take more risks of people getting sick, because those who do get sick can be protected, will not be as likely to consume hospital resources. And then after that, if we really want to get to normal, we need a vaccine. And the ones that started in March, the mRNA vaccines, Moderna was the first. We might see results from, I think they have their safety results and they're moving to phase 2 testing now. We might see efficacy results in 2 to 3 months. And if, fingers crossed, and there's a strong chance it won't work, but if it does work, they've already started manufacturing ramp up, and we could see the fastest vaccine development timescale ever seen in the history of humanity. We might get that vaccine out to people towards the end of the year. And once that's in full-blown vaccination, which will take a few months, sometime around January, February, we could start to get back to normal. But that's the very best. And so working from there, you got to figure we're in this for at least 12 to 18 months, and then it's a gradual return on that. And all of our strategy is built on that basis. Investment won't return to normal. Business won't return to normal until we get all the way through that 12 to 18 month curve.
Right. And Therese, what about you?
We're looking at right now what it would take to bring people back in the office. But even then, if that happens in the next month, it would probably be half the people on a 2-day schedule and the other half on a 2-day schedule. We have, in March, we virtualized our user conference in London. And I think it was Tim that said, we actually had twice as many attendees. So I don't see things getting back to normal for at least a year, at least.
Great. And Roger, what about you?
Well, I start with the fact that we're dependent on the government loosening their restrictions. And it's not just the federal, but it's the federal, the state, the county, and the city. I'm trying to watch all 4 of those groups. And they're close to being on the same page. I think California has been far more restrictive than many of the other states, far more restrictive. Then we're dependent on really 2 groups. One, our customers. It's our food service business that's off. And again, to keep it simple, that's a lot of restaurants mainly. But until our customers start back up, we really can't start back up. But we are doing things to get ready. A good example is we're switching over to a mobile ordering platform so we don't have to send our salespeople out into the field. We know our restaurant customers aren't going to want to see them face to face like they used to. We had luckily started on this before COVID-19, but we're putting the pedal to the metal to get that throughout our entire system. Plus, it's going to take cost out of our system and make us more efficient. I also look at the interconnectivity that everything has. We already talked about, the airlines. Until the airlines get going, we're not going to get those tourists back in Vegas to open up the restaurants that want to buy from us. Somebody mentioned to me the other day the oil industry. Price of oil, went beneath the floor recently. We all know that. Yeah. Demand's down. Well, with demand down, the refineries aren't processing. And when they close down the refineries, they stop producing some of the byproducts. Well, one of those byproducts that impacts the food industry is ethanol. Ethanol is used for making CO2. And that's used by beef, pork, chicken, seafood producers for freezing their product. So if the oil industry's not up, producing their ethanol to get us the CO2 to freeze our product, we're in trouble. And then again on that interdependence, okay, we may be seafood, but we're still dependent on our retail stores and our food service customers having all the other proteins, beef, pork, chicken, the whole bit. The chairman of Tyson came out, or the CEO of Tyson came out, I think it was yesterday, and said, oh my God, there's a food concern we have. Well, there is, and it's being kept somewhat of a secret, if you will. Less and less cattle are being slaughtered every week. 15% of the pork processing plants are closed down now. Poultry farms are euthanizing millions of birds at a time because there's nobody at the plant to process them. You can keep going and say, all the milk producers are dumping their milk into the sewer. But if we don't have beef, pork, chicken and seafood, it's going to be hard just to have the seafood. I'm not convinced that we're going to pick up their business. People want to go to the protein shelves and get it all. So a lot of interdependence. It's definitely going to be slow. I know for us, we're going to have to help our customers because we've got a mountain of receivables that on the one hand, they're doing well, but on the other hand, we have a lot that have been not paying. So we're going to have to come up with a program to allow them to slowly pay us back while coming up with another program to give them probably some better terms on their new purchases. I agree, 12 to 18 months, absolutely.
All right, Brian, you get the final word on this. What do you think the return to normal looks like?
It's a really good question. So I have this group of 8 factories, and we're kind of running each of those factories but one. 7 are in business now. So we have this extreme hygiene protocol, right? Lots of social distancing. We have factory workers on 3 shifts, complete 3 shifts, so we can spread them out. We physically moved out the machines to give more spacings. We have 5S type tape everywhere, staggered meals and breaks, masks, gloves, sanitizers, temperature checking. So now we're doing temperature checking for every employee to get admittance to the factory. And we just are going to start on Thursday doing 100% testing for the virus itself, where the swab test is done and every employee will be tested once a month. And we've had an interesting conversation with our labor lawyers about, well, can we really do this and what happens if employees object? But so far, everyone's been very enthusiastic about participating because they see it as keeping a healthy factory environment and keeping a source of income for themselves. So now I wonder, how much of this is really going to go away? Because almost everything I just said could be sustained. We're sustaining it now in these 7 factories, right? So I wonder, when you go to Disneyland, will you see temperature scanning? They do a back check today, but maybe in the future you do temperature scanning. Tim, I think you mentioned contact tracing. It'll be an interesting balancing of privacy laws versus public safety. But some of us of a certain age went through 9/11. And if you had told me before 9/11 that we were doing all this TSA stuff we do in the airports now, I would have said, no way, that's a huge invasion of my privacy. But here we are, and we've adapted, and we're dealing with it. And I think a lot of these kind of short-term hygiene, employee health and welfare measures that we're taking now might get some legs and stick as part of the new normal in the future. I also think there's a lot of M&A folks on this call. There's going to be opportunistic M&A opportunities even during the downtime. The capital markets came back after freezing up for a bit after both 9/11 and also after the Great Recession in 2008. So I think we will have opportunities to respond and resurge. But I think a lot of the protocols and the screenings might actually stick with us in the New World Order. I would add that we would also maybe see more local supply chains. It's an interesting question. I don't want to get too political with this, but will we wind up after all this is over with more of a sense of community or less? We could respond as a society, well, we're all in this together. We all have to get tested for all of us to be safe. Or we could become more individualistic. And one could ask, gee, will the pandemic help or hurt populism and isolationism? And one can offer different opinions about what that might do to society at large later on. So it'll be interesting. It'll be fun to see how our factories and how our businesses adapt, but also what happens to culture and to society at large. I wish I had an answer for those, but I think they're interesting questions to contemplate.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I really appreciate. I was going to ask for some last words of wisdom or lessons learned from this, but I see a bunch of questions in our chat room. So would you guys mind if we post some questions to you guys from the chat room?
Sure.
Okay. So first question coming from Julie. Hi, Tim. Do you have a base or aggressive scenario based on reliable antibody testing?
So what I showed, and you can look at it in more detail, I think is the best case under the best of all of these things. If you have antibodies, if you have the good contact tracing, et cetera, it's not going to get any better than what I showed there. I think the reality is that it's probably going to be a little delayed from that. And I think antibody testing is going to be amazingly powerful. Number one, if we get the good, reliable tests propagated, not all the noisy ones that are giving us false results. And that's going to take some time just to validate them. The second thing is all that testing is completely useless if you don't have an army of people to follow up on that. And I heard some stuff that is happening now about a proposal to put $45 billion into an army of 180,000 contact tracers. It's an eminently trainable activity that could put our workforce back to work. It's a perfect government project, and I'm really hopeful. We're about a month behind in doing what we should have, but if we do, I think we can still get this under control. We can go back to work with all the PPE that Brian talked about and the testing, and we can get to something approaching normality on a reasonable time frame, working differently than we did. But I think I'm still optimistic, not only that we can get on that best case scenario, that the vaccines will come through an unprecedented speed, and that we will pour the money into manufacturing now, knowing that 8 or 9 out of 10 of those candidates are not going to work out, and we're going to blow $5 billion on useless manufacturing, but who cares? If we make those good decisions, and I'm optimistic we will, we're going to be back at this this time next year, back at something approaching normality, but hopefully with, as Brian said, actually some positive cultural changes, an appreciation for our interdependency, and a gratitude for having a job, not just going, what are you doing for me today? So that's my grumpy old man speaking.
I have a lot of gratitude for our freeways being accessible right now. Oh my God.
Enjoy it while you can.
Exactly. I'm going to be so sad when I get back on the freeway and it's just stopped.
Right.
Well, maybe it won't.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because Therese, you mentioned that, you and Tim had moved to, at-home working pretty seamlessly. And the question will be, do some businesses really just not go back to having a large office space and big office rent and opt to have a work from home program? So
we might. I'm not convinced we'll go back to business as usual.
I think there'll be a big change there. I think people enjoy it. Companies can cut back on their rent expense, and people have figured out how to communicate while all these employees are working at home.
Yeah.
And maybe, I think now that we've all experienced what clean air is like, we might be more motivated to make that happen too.
Right.
Yeah. Well, again, I think there's been a lot of silver linings in all of this. I could make a list a mile long of the silver linings that I've seen for our company. And I think the work at home potential going forward is one of them.
Yeah. I'm going to combine two questions into one. I think this is getting at both, or I guess it's really Jody's question asked two different ways. How much of your focus is on short-term triage needs versus long-term strategic planning right now?
I think Tim said 95% was on his strategic. I would say we're probably closer to 80% on strategic. I mean, we made the transition. Everyone's working from home. We're communicating. We're productive. How are we going to, if this goes on for another 12, 18 months, how do we deal with that? And where are the silver linings and the opportunities? So I would say we are heavily focused on the strategic nature right now.
Yeah, I would agree. We're 80-20. We've done so much on improving the health and safety features. We've got a 30-page COVID-19 preparedness and response plan that's written that keeps growing by the day. So I think everything there is in place. Brian gave a great summary of all the things he's doing for their employees. I think we're doing most, if not all of those ourselves. So it's time to focus on the business strategy looking forward.
I agree with that. I guess the only hesitation I have with aerospace is the strategy has to be adaptable to different scenarios in the future. I'm having a hard time seeing exactly the timetable for aviation's recovery, right? So I agree, I've moved beyond the reactive mode mostly. I think our businesses are stabilized and we're pretty safe from that point of view. But I have kind of strategy A, B, and C, depending on what happens in aerospace and how fast. And I'm just not sure. So there's some adaptability, less certainty with the timing of my strategy than there used to be. That will return. It'll return to normal in 3 or 4 years, I think, for aviation. But until then, I'm going to have to be a little bit more adaptable and agile.
Yeah, Brian, I think that the business model for a lot of the airlines requires something along the lines of 75% passenger capacity.
Right.
And here they are talking about, well, let's cut the number of passengers in half, put plexiglass down the middle, whatever it might be. Well, there went the business model. These airlines aren't going to be profitable then. So there's still issues to be worked on.
Yeah, I mean, I was just reading something about this morning. It's cheaper for these airlines to park their airplanes rather than to have them only half full.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a threshold you want to get over for the airlines to be incentivized to even put new routes, or should I say reinstate old routes, just to make it viable. Yeah. It's cheaper for them to stay out of business.
Yeah. Well, there's already been 3 or 4 big airlines that have gone and filed UK already.
Yeah. Yeah. The other complication, as someone mentioned, is oil prices. From a manufacturer's point of view, a lot of the industry has been driving off of more fuel efficient airplanes. Well, when you have a lot of old airplanes parked and super low oil prices, that's going to cut down on some of the development in the industry for a while, perhaps. And it may not be that great for the environment, by the way, too. So this latest routine, it was a really bad time for these world powers to get into a production fight over oil. It just adds insult to injury for aviation.
Yeah. Well, I see that we're running close to being out of time. Maybe I'll ask Michael if we can try and capture some of these chat questions, and we'll try and get these answered separately and try and get back to you folks on those. Maybe we can wrap up with 30 seconds from each of you on one lesson learned, one observation, one thing you want to with. Maybe we'll start with Therese.
That's too bad, because I was sitting there thinking about it. I think that the return to core values of serving our employees and making sure that they're safe, and serving our customers to see what we can do to actually help them through it, is really a long-term play with a lot of positive views.
How about you, Tim? Oh, you're on mute, Tim.
What struck me about our societies in general, despite the outliers, the mass acceptance and willingness to seclude. Even though most people be fine, they're doing it because they realize the importance for others of doing that. And that really impressed me. And I guess that gave me a sense of optimism that under all the shells of bitterness that we have on our daily life, there's actually a deep desire to do what's right and to do what's good, and that was exhibited by people's doing the right thing in this.
Right. And how about you, Brian?
Well, I think I would summarize by saying take care of employees and customers, over-communicate, manage cash carefully, don't forget the top line, and to be aggressive in the marketplace, even with opportunistic acquisitions, and look for ways to differentiate yourself during these downtimes. It's no time like now to really make strides and outpace the rest of the industry.
Great. And Roger, what about you? You get the last word.
Last word. Well, for me, I think everybody needs to be ready with their D plan for the next crisis that's going to come, because it will. And in the interim, strengthen your balance sheet so you can better afford to survive through it. And at the same time, reinvigorate your company, take costs out, and look at all your processes. Then my last thought is, let's remember that as a country, we've survived so many business challenges over the years that I've been in business. I could sit here and just name 30 of them, including a lot of viruses. So after every rain, there's a rainbow. We all need to stay positive.
I love it. That's great. If we were live, you guys would be getting a standing ovation right now, but I'll leave it with thank you guys so much for everything and taking your time with us. Michael, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, Steve, thank you. And again, on behalf of ACG Los Angeles, for member sponsors, and for those who are watching this afternoon, I want to thank once again Therese, Roger, Tim, and Brian for sharing your perspectives today. I think it was really interesting and really insightful. And Steve Lee, thanks for moderating and all the time you spent putting together that agenda and structuring the conversation. I think it was a really quite a valuable webinar for us to have. We look at this CEO Roundtable as potentially a series that we'll launch here at ACG. So for those of you watching, if it's something that's interesting, feel free to let us know. We're interested in building this out. I want to mention quickly before we depart that on Thursday of this week, Thursday, April 30th, we have our next webinar, Reps and Warranties, looking at that issue here within the COVID-19 era, but more importantly, beyond that. It's an interesting discussion. We'll have a great panel there as well. So again, Thursday, April 30th at 4 o'clock. You can look at your email or ACG Los Angeles's website to register. So with that, we'll sign off. Thanks again, and everyone stay safe and be healthy.
Good evening.
Thank you.
Take care.